President Obama concluding the State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress tonight. The president saying that the State of the Union is getting stronger, echoing there the words of Ronald Reagan in 1986, who said the State of the Union was stronger than a year ago and growing stronger each day. President Obama in an assertive speech with a lot of policy specifics, also taking on a lot of the issues on which he has been most criticized, both by people within his own party and by those across the aisle. The president addressing everything from the Solyndra issue, the Energy Department's funding of a solar panel manufacturer, to his pledges as a candidate and in the early days of his presidency to change the tone, in tonight's words, to change the temperature in Washington. Joining us once again from Washington is my colleague Chris Matthews at Hardball. Chris, what's your reaction to the speech?
Well, everything you said, and just to add, I thought it had a real grab for the high ground in terms of optimism. He wants the Republicans to be what he calls declinists. He wants to be the optimist. That's a very powerful thing in American politics. Secondly, it was a Clinton-esque speech, very detailed, long enough to make the point that he was strong on all the policy questions, thereby knocking down Mitt Romney's constant harangue that he's never run a company, never run a state. This guy's run a country. And he's trumped him on that, and he's made it clear he's running the country. Cooperative, talking about I will do the stuff that's tough for me as a Democrat in Medicare and Medicaid, even Social Security. You do your stuff in taxes or there's no deal. Taking the side of the 99%, the populist side against the 1% on taxes. Challenging Congress to clean up its own act. Maybe an unfair shot, but a good, strong one about insider trading and getting rid of the filibuster. Very, very strong, and especially talking about giving jobs to the soldiers, men and women who come home from fighting our wars. I thought it covered a lot of territory, and what we learned before in terms of the success of these speeches, people like detail. That's why they like Clinton's speeches, and they don't mind length if it has information. So I thought it was a strong, patriotic, optimistic speech, but it also had punch to it. It said to the Republicans, I know where you live. I'm going after you on the filibuster, on insider trading. Look out, I can fight.
The president's speech tonight, an hour and 5 minutes long, throughout with an energetic and even loud at times tone. Not a particularly angry speech, but an assertive one. Going into this speech, a lot of us here on this panel in New York and those we've been talking about it with, had said that we expected taxes to be the central issue of this speech. Taxes certainly part of the speech, but not exactly the spine on which the whole speech hung, Lawrence. What do you think about the balance of specifics, poetry, and prose?
Well, taxes was done mostly in poetry. It was all nice-sounding things with absolutely no tax specifics. The closest he came to anything specific, it was a lot of this tax fairy dust that you will sprinkle on corporate America, and suddenly that will create a hiring pattern, or that'll induce manufacturers to behave differently. It's never worked in the past, and most of those pieces of legislation die in process anyway. The one specific thing was that people making over $1 million should not pay less than 30% in effective income tax rates. And even that, when you look at the handout they gave us with some additional specificity to it, they say they want to exempt charitable contributions from being hit by that law. So as soon as you start looking at the first layer of detail on even that one, it is not at all clear how they would do that. And so what's happened for Democrats is they have to use the tax code instead of spending to get to the social policies they want to get to because of the complexities of budgeting. And so that's why they have this new faith that the tax code can create economic behavior in industry that we've never seen it create.
One thing on the tax issue, in some ways I thought the more interesting element was on the corporate tax side. Yeah. He argued for something new called a global minimum tax. Yes. And basically what that is currently a company can put their money in Ireland, and Ireland is a very, very low corporate tax rate in order to attract companies putting their money there. You don't have to pay taxes on that money until you bring it back, which corporations often never do or don't do until Congress passes a special overseas profits tax break. Under this, you would have to pay the difference between the Irish tax rate and this global minimum tax every year. So you wouldn't be able to just sock your money away and never pay any American taxes on it. That's a big change to the way we treat overseas corporations corporate income, and will be, if Congress ever in fact does take it up, which obviously is a big if, a huge, huge fight.
Ezra, let me just ask you on this subject, in terms of the specifics, tax or otherwise, what do you think was the most ambitious, specific policy that the president laid out? Not just a goal for the country, but a specific policy change.
The Buffett tax, it sounds like a 30% alternative minimum tax. And once you're a millionaire, if what you would be paying is less than 30%, this would automatically kick in. The other piece that was specific, and I haven't seen the charitable deduction element, if you eliminate all deductions and subsidies, the home mortgage interest deduction, the health care tax exclusion, for people making over $1 million, you raise an enormous amount of money. You're talking about trillions, or $1 trillion or more over 10 years. If they were actually able to do it, it would essentially create a sort of a flat tax at the top of the code for high earners. If they could manage that, it would be quite a feat.
There is for people who aren't wonks, there is a fairness case to be made for it. That is, listen, we've tried to give people tax breaks on, for example, the interest you pay on your mortgage or having a kid, because we as a country think those are good social policies, but zillionaires don't need those breaks. Zillionaires don't need those incentives. They can pay for it on their own. Reverend Sharpton, in terms of the overall structure of the speech, the president started with Iraq and with killing bin Laden. He ended at the end with the same basic idea, which is that Americans, and particularly politicians in Washington, should look to the example of the armed forces, our very, very accomplished and very busy armed forces, in order to find a way to work together. What do you think of that as a rhetorical device and as a big picture idea for the country?
No, I think that from just a level of oratorical skills, he really put his opponents in an awkward position, because by using the military as his example for unity, watching each other's back, talking about the SEALs and the flag he had, it puts them in an awkward position to attack that. It almost turns on his head this whole thing of what he's proposed is un-American. They look un-American if you don't have each other's back. And he did it, as you said, he sandwiched it in by starting with the Iraq, ending with and bin Laden, ending with the SEALs and bin Laden, and in the middle had specifics on energy, specifics on tax, insourcing of jobs, education. I mean, he went into areas that he knows his base will argue with him on. He sandwiched it with some very specific policy things, and then he ended again with the military. So I think where he went to poetry, the poetry was wrapped in the American flag and military uniform, and the prose was very, very specific. I think it was very well done.
In terms of what happens next, in just a few minutes, just a couple of minutes, we're expecting to hear the Republican response to the State of the Union. It will be delivered tonight by two-term Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels. Of course, the backstory on Mitch Daniels is that, number one, he has a, forgive the phrase, hell of a labor fight going on right now in Indiana. Today, Democrats in the Indiana state legislature did not show up in the legislative chamber to block a quorum so that the state could not be voted into becoming a right-to-work state, stripping union rights in the state. The Super Bowl will be hosted in Indianapolis in just a couple of weekends. The NFL Players Association is among the forces in union politics making a very big stink about this. Tonight, as the State of the Union is airing in Indiana, local Indiana stations are also airing an ad, a labor ad against against Governor Daniels, reminding him of the fact that he used to say that he did not support making Indiana a right-to-work state. Of course, the more prosaic context is that lots of Republicans wish that Mitch Daniels was running for president this year. Karen Finney, in terms of the partisanship in tonight's speech, how tough was the president on Republicans? How brightly did he draw those lines? Did you see it as particularly combative in partisan terms?
Not so much combative, but I think to what Reverend Al was saying, he was very clear in kind of getting these guys in the corner. When he talked about things like, he called their bluff, for example, on infrastructure. He said, we can do these things, but you got to send me the bill now. Clearly a reference to the argument that Republicans have been using against him about Keystone. So in very specific places, he talked about very specific things that should and could get done this year. And again, sort of left it to, I'm happy to work with you if I can, but if I can't, I'm going to look for ways to move forward. So he sort of walked that fine line between, I want to work with you, and there was also that sort of team of rivals moment, frankly, when we talked about Hillary Clinton ran against me, we should, Bill Gates, we should all be able to come together. And it was, again, reminiscent of there is no red, there is no blue, there is one America, trying to be very optimistic and very hopeful, but also, like you say, very American. Remember, the Republican line against him, he is not pro-America enough. enough. He's, pessimistic about America. Well, that was a very optimistic speech, and I think what you're going to hear from Mitch Daniels is far less optimistic and more fatalistic, and that contrast was important as well.
Chris Matthews in Washington with about 120 seconds until we hear from Mitch Daniels. That optimism that both you and Karen Finney were talking about, I thought bookended tonight with the president talking again, like old candidate Obama, about needing to change the temperature in Washington, change the way things get done. Was that a surprise for you to hear that tonight?
No, I think he's doing it, but he wants it on his terms as well. He certainly wants to get something done in terms of a trade-off, in terms of entitlements and taxes on the wealthy. Of course, he wants it done. He does want to end this filibuster stranglehold that has prevented any president from operating on his mandate or her mandate. You can't get anything done in this Congress unless you've got 60 in the Senate, and that means you've just committed a tremendous landslide. That sets a very high standard on getting anything done at all, as we saw in this last 3 years. So he wants to be an activist president. The way the rules are working in the Congress, they've hamstrung him, and he wants to change them. If that's getting along with his opponents, fine, but he wants to get stuff done more than he wants to get along with people.
Briefly, Ezra, when the president specifically proposed a 90-day limit for an up or down vote on all nominees, obviously he's saying exclude nominations from the filibuster. Has anything like that ever happened or worked?
No, remember in 2005, the Bush administration tried to get rid of that. Obama opposed that. Republicans will throw that back. Also, it should be noted, he also has a proposal in his policy paper tonight to make filibusters talking again. You have to actually hold the floor. He didn't make that specifically in the speech, but that would be a very big change to the Senate if it actually got put into place.
About 20
I think also he was brilliant in pointing out his grandfather was in Patton's army, his grandmother was on the Bomber Assembly line. So all that Bertha un-American stuff he took on early. I mean, the imagery that he drew was brilliant.